Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings on the last messenger of Allah. I'll just read you the meanings of the verses which our brother just recited, as I do feel it is essential that whenever Quran is read, we don't just enjoy the beauty of the recitation so it becomes, a form of Islamic pop, but rather that we understand what it is that Allah is saying, because the Quran is the message. That is the goal, is to understand the message and to be able to apply it. Sometimes we get lost in the means and we lose out on what the message is supposed to be. Same thing happens when it comes to the issues of memorization of the Quran. We do spend a lot of effort, we put our children through to memorize the Quran, but to understand what the Quran is actually saying, we haven't stressed that afterwards. It's just about memorizing. Or in Ramadan, it's about reading the whole Quran in Ramadan. So we'll go from the beginning to the end of Ramadan. We've read the whole Quran, but we don't know what the Quran actually said. The Sahaba, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he said that we used to learn the Quran. This is the Sahaba now. We used to learn the Quran 10 verses at a time. And we didn't move on to the next 10 until we understood the commandments that were in those 10 and we tried to apply them. So it was about understanding, as the Prophet ﷺ had said, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah wishes good, He gives him or her the deep understanding of the religion. So it is the understanding which ultimately makes the difference, and not the means to that understanding. We have to use the means, but we should understand that they're in fact means and not ends. So the verses our brother recited from Surah Shura, and if Allah had pleased, He would surely have made them a single community. But He makes whom He pleases enter into His mercy, and the unjust it is that shall have no guardian or helper. Or have they taken guardians besides Him? But Allah is the guardian, and He gives life to the dead, and He has power over all things. And whatever thing you disagree, and in whatever thing you disagree, the judgment therefore is in Allah's hand. That is Allah, my Lord. On Him do I rely, and to Him do I turn time after time. The originator of the heavens and the earth, He made mates for you from among yourselves, and mates of the cattle too, multiplying you thereby. Nothing like a likeness of Him, and He is the hearing, the seeing. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing similar to Him. وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. And He is the all-hearing, or the all-hearing and the all-seeing. Okay, those were the verses that were recited, and those verses were chosen because in particular Allah describes Himself here and lays down the basic foundation of understanding Him. That there is nothing, in fact, similar to Him. Though He describes Himself in a variety of ways that may be misconstrued, may be misunderstood. In terms of creation, when we think of these various descriptions, nothing is similar to Him. But at the same time, He uses terms in order for us to understand that He is the one who knows all. He sees everything we do without eyes. He hears everything we say without ears. The ears and the eyes, that's our situation. The topic of the morning, the beliefs of the Salaf and the Khalaf, is a huge topic, in fact. In the few minutes that we have, people study this, in courses that last a year. Okay. So, realistically, we're only going to look at some aspects of the differences. And really, what we need to understand when we look back at differences is how they are relevant to us today. Those differences of the past, which have no relevance today, for the average Muslim, there is no need to get into them. As Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge which is of no benefit. For those people who are specializing in aqeedah, that is their area of specialization, they will study those arguments and issues of the past. Why? Because they may come back again in the future. This is the nature of shaitan, right? That he tries something for a while and people fall into it and they eventually overcome it. He won't come back with it again right away because people have now understood it. You can't affect them. So he will wait some generations and then he comes back with it. Right? So it's not surprising to see and to hear things, for those of us who specialize in aqeedah, to hear things today which were spoken of 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. People talk the same thing, right? Using maybe different words, different terminologies, because each time has its own common terminologies. And so there may be difference in terminologies, but the concepts are still the same concept. So, from the issues of difference, specifically with regarding to understanding Allah. And of course, this area is a critical area. It is the most critical area of knowledge that we as Muslims are required to know and to acquire. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Talabul ilmi farid ala kulli Muslim," seeking knowledge is compulsory, is a religious obligation for every Muslim. The knowledge that we are supposed to seek should be first and foremost the knowledge which will help us to answer the very first question we will be asked in the grave by Munkar and Nakir, which is, Man Rabbuk? Who was your Lord? So that's the first thing that we need to know. Who is Allah? And much of the Quran, in fact, it has been said, 1/3 of the Quran focuses on who is Allah. Which is why Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that Surah Al-Ikhlas is equal to 1/3 of the Quran. Some people take it to mean, okay, you just have to recite Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times and you recited the Quran, but that's not what was meant here. That's not what was meant here. Surah Al-Ikhlas is describing who is Allah. The very first verse of Surah Al-Ikhlas describes who Allah is, and the rest of the verses only gives details about the same description in the very first verse, and the final verse repeats the first verse. But it's all about who is Allah. That's why the surah was also well known among the Salaf as Surah At-Tawheed. We know it as Surah Al-Ikhlas. It's what's written in our Qur'ans now, but actually the names of the surahs were not revealed. The names were added by earlier generations for identification purposes. Important to understand that. Because if you pick up Qur'ans from India and Pakistan, Surah Al-Isra is called Surah Bani Israel. So now if you were mistakenly thinking that these names of the surahs were part of the Quran and Revelation, somebody brings these two Qurans to you and says, what is this? You're confused. And this is what will happen to the average person who doesn't have that understanding. That's why it is important to understand. So whether you call Surah Al-Ikhlas Al-Ikhlas or Surah At-Tawheed, it's okay, not a problem, because those were just identifying terms. Now Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did refer to the second chapter as Al-Baqarah. He called it by that name. So some of the surahs, the Prophet ﷺ used the name. Some used a name. Al-Fatiha, he called it Fatihatul Kitab. We shortened it down to Al-Fatiha. So there's a lot of leeway there. Anyway, the point is that approximately a third of the Quran focuses on describing who is Allah. Because this is the beginning of faith. If we don't know who Allah is, then for sure we're going to end up worshipping other than Him. That is what is to be expected. Because we are living in a world where we judge things according to what we can see, touch, feel, hear, our five senses. So we will tend to describe things and understand things according to what our senses tell us. And Allah is not from those things which are recognizable or we cannot grasp by way of our five senses. Therefore, He revealed the Quran and the books previous and clarified to human beings who He was. Now, those descriptions which came in the Quran came in Arabic, in the Arabic language. And it was the Arabic language which people used. It was a communication between Allah and humankind, conveyed to us by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Quran, the recital or the recitation, is Allah addressing humankind through Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Which is why the Quran does not follow the typical pattern of books. You know, for non-Muslims oftentimes, and even for new Muslims, and even for old Muslims, when they read the Quran and they find it shifting from one topic to another and here and there, sometimes it becomes confusing. You know, people have difficulty in understanding why. Why is it like that? For non-Muslims especially, it's a big issue, because for them, reading books, the Bible, you know, the typical books that they have, these books are story books. So they're used to reading stories, novels. So when they pick up the Quran, they're expecting a storybook. But they're not finding a storybook. Only Surah Yusuf, that's the only chapter where we have a story going from the beginning almost to the end. And even the last verses break away from the story pattern. But 90% of the surah is one story. There's only one surah like that in the whole Quran. So unless they happen to open the Quran right on that, otherwise what they're going to run into is topics coming here, there, the universe, man, you know, part of the story of Moses, you know, Jesus, nature, the angels, the jinn, and just coming. So for the person used to the storybook way, it appears as confusion. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they say, he must have been high. Or he was, you know, in some kind of epileptic fits. So they put it right, you know. And as he was in his fits, he babbled out his words, right? So they have a variety of ways of trying to rationalize what they find in front of them. But reality is that the Quran is Allah talking to us. And the way that we talk normally, when we have conversations, we don't talk in stories. Is it? You sit down with a person for an hour. From the beginning of that hour to the end of the hour, you're telling one story? No way. We don't do that. I mean, there may be some rare occasions where you have a long story to tell, but most times when we sit and talk, we don't talk like that. We talk a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of something else, maybe a little bit of a story here and there. That's the way we talk. And the Quran is Allah talking to us the way we talk. Now somebody who was outside of your conversation, you and somebody else was talking, if they listen to you talk for an hour, why is he talking about this? And you know, you're trying to figure out, but between yourself and the person you're talking to, there are common things that you have, so you're able to talk about all these topics, but they're able to link it all together because you have a common background. So between you two, there are things you talk about which are unsaid. You're talking around them. Somebody outside of your conversation would not know the basis, but between you two there's a common basis, so you can talk like that. So once we understand that the Quran is Allah's communication to humankind, He's talking to humankind, clarifying who He is. And in that clarification, it involves descriptions of Himself, as well as descriptions of the world that He created, the reason for its creation, the creatures who He created, human beings who he's talking to, he is calling them to understand who he is so they will realize that he is the one who deserves to be worshipped. And what is the consequence of not worshipping him? So all of these issues, of course, including the fact that he did send messengers carrying this information. And that it is not enough for us merely to know the information, but to understand how those messengers understood it and applied it. So all of that is coming. When we understand the context, then everything falls into place. It's all just clarification of Allah, humankind, their relationship to Him, and the world around them. The parallel world of the jinn, the angels, and what is to come beyond this world. So, it is actually all one. There is a thread which links each and every part of the Quran together. So, when we look at the understanding of the Quran, of course, that understanding should be in accordance with the understanding of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and that of his companions. If we are to understand the Quran, this is the starting point. Because the Quran was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Allah said, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. I revealed to you the reminder, the Quran, in order that you would clarify for the people what was revealed for them. Quran was revealed for humankind. Muhammad ﷺ was the bearer. Revealed first to him, applicable to himself, and then conveyed to the world. So, we have to keep that in mind, that the Quran was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He, being an Arab, understood what was revealed to him with Allah's clarifications. Then he conveyed the Quran to his companions. What was unclear to them, they would ask him. If there was confusion, they would get clarification. And they applied the Quran. That first generation, their understanding of Allah most certainly is the most correct understanding. We should have no doubt about it. Because when Prophet Muhammad had said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ قَرْنِي, the best of people were my generation. Best in what way? They had the most money? Certainly not. They were the most powerful? Certainly not. They were the best because they best understood that revelation and applied it best. Now, each and every Sahabi, we cannot say that each and every Sahabi was better than everyone who came after them. No, we can't say that. Each and every. We can say Abu Bakr, yes, because Prophet ﷺ had said it. But each and every Sahabi, no. There were others who came from among the Tabi'een, and the Tabi'een were greater than individuals amongst the Sahaba. But as a generation, they were the best. So we take their understanding as a group, as a generation, not necessarily an individual understanding, because you might find differences amongst them. One or two may have held one position, but the majority have held another position. So we have to be conscious of those differences which may be individual, but what they all agreed upon, what they all understood, was what Islam is. What contradicts their understanding is not Islam. It is something else. It's a misinterpretation. Or I call it Mislam. So, when we go now to understand who Allah is, as mentioned in the Quran and clarified by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Sunnah, there are three basic principles which the early generation, that first generation, followed, and which the latter generations, which are called the Khalaf, that's what it means. Khalaf means those who come after. Khalifa comes from the same root. Salaf meaning those who came before. These three principles, basically, the Salaf and the Khalaf differed. And of course, as we said, the best of generations is the Sahaba, the beginning of the Salaf. So, as we look at the differences, it should be clear to you that their understanding, in fact, is correct. The three principles. One, for those of you taking notes, principle number one concerns reason and revelation. Reason and revelation. Principle number two involves the allegorical and the literal. Allegorical and the literal. And the third principle is prerequisites for evidence. Prerequisites for evidence. Okay, these are the main 3 points I think are sufficient for us to reflect on, and which have direct application in our own times. The first, reason and revelation. Allah gave us reason, logic, a mind to think things through. And that's what we tell Christians who have accepted that 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. We say you have intelligence, God has given you intelligence to reason, logic. Everything around you tells you that 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Not 1. Of course, for the Christian, they say it is a divine mystery. How 1 + 1 + 1 can equal 1? We just believe. The point, though, for them is that if they had revelation to back them, then they would be justified. But the verses in the Bible, in the New Testament, which said that there are three that bear witness, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These verses, which are found in the King James Version, the earliest of the versions of English translation of the Bible, were removed in the Revised Standard Version of the Bible by a major group of scholars, Christian scholars, who said that there were many errors in that first translation, which did not rely on all of the manuscripts, but only a few. And it was clear to them that this was an addition not found in the earliest manuscripts of the Bible. So they removed it. Made a footnote, because the verse number is still there. They'll say in the footnote, not found in the original manuscripts. So the scriptural evidence, which would have been for them revelation, the closest thing that they had to revelation, is no longer there. And their own history clearly indicates that this concept was developed hundreds of years after the time of Christ. That's historical record that they have. Muslims don't have to produce anything. It's in their own books. So, means it's just an idea. And ideas can be right or wrong. That's their situation. For us, we could run into the same problem if we look at Islam as I was told when I first became a Muslim, that every Muslim must follow a madhab, one of four. All four were correct, but we must choose one. If you don't choose one, then your imam is Satan. So I chose at the time to be a Hanafi, because I was traveling with Jamaat Tabligh, and they informed me that most Muslims were Hanafis, and the title given to Imam Abu Hanifa was Imam-i-Azam, meaning the greatest of the Imams. I said, yeah, makes sense. I'll be a Hanafi. However, after studying under some brothers from the Shafi'i madhab, and I came to understand certain differences, I was still trying to apply the principle that they were both correct. But when I ran into the issue where Hanafis say that if you accidentally touch a woman, you have wudu, and Shafi'is say you don't have wudu, I was stuck. Because to accept that both of them were correct means you could have wudu and not have wudu at the same time. And to do that intellectually, to me, was the same as accepting that 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. You have to turn off your brain, your reason, your intellect, and just believe. So, when we're dealing with reason and revelation, we do understand Allah has given us an intellect to understand. However, He revealed the Quran, and it is the basis of Islam. And everything that concerns Islam should be understood through the Quran, first and foremost. When it comes to applying the Quran, then our reason tells us it's applicable here, it's not applicable there. This verse is for this circumstance, that verse is for this other circumstance. That we're using our reason. However, when the Quran says this, and we say, no, it's not this, it is that, because my reason tells me that it should be this and not that, now we have a problem. Now we have a problem. Should we give precedence to our reason over revelation, or should revelation take precedence over reason? This is the point. The correct position was simply stated by Ali ibn Abi Talib when he said that were the religion based purely on reason and logic, then the bottom of the socks should be wiped instead of the top. However, I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wipe the top, not the bottom. So he clarified there that Islam is fundamentally based on revelation. Reason must come after revelation. That's what Umar ibn al-Khattab referred to when he stopped doing tawaf, pointed to the black stone so that everybody who was making tawaf at the time could hear a message he wanted to give everybody. He pointed and talked to the black stone. Actually, he wasn't talking to the black stone, he talked to the people. But he talked as if he were talking to the black stone for the people, saying, I know you are only a stone. That's all you are, just a stone. You can neither bring any good for me, nor can you harm me. And the only reason why I am kissing you is because I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kiss you. That's it. So I don't go in to try to get some reasoning behind this here. You know, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam kissed. He said, take your rights of Hajj from me, we kiss. That's it. As to people saying, well, you know why he kissed it? It's because of the barakah. So therefore the whole issue is about barakah. However you can get the barakah. So when you fight your way there, you know, you try to rub, not just kiss, get your whole face in, get your arms in, if you can, you know, you try to do everything in there. Get as much barakah on yourself as possible. So it's a whole other interpretation. So they will do everything far beyond kissing. Bring the baby, wipe the baby in, it's a whole different mentality altogether. So we understand that in fact revelation takes precedence over reason. That is the deed. Today, people challenge this, especially with regards to issues which go against modern knowledge. The biggest example, well-known example, is that of the hadith of the fly. The hadith of the fly, where Prophet ﷺ had said, if a fly falls into your glass, and this glass was put here for what? Empty. Oh, the water is over here. I didn't notice that over there. I just saw this glass come and thought some water was supposed to come with it. The fly, okay. This was the So if a fly falls in your drink, the Prophet ﷺ said, dunk him in. Then throw him out and drink. Because under one wing is disease and under the other wing is the cure. Now, according to modern science, medical studies, the only thing they know coming from the fly is disease. Nobody uses flies for cure. Grinding up flies. We don't know it. Maybe sometime they will, but for now nobody's using that, right? So we only know disease from the fly. So they said this hadith must be wrong. Reason, the hadith of course is revelation. Authentic hadith is revelation because Allah said in the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He doesn't speak from his own desires in matters of instructions, deen, etc. What he speaks is revelation, which has come to him. So, his statement is revelation. Modern science says otherwise. So what do you do? Well, if your tawakkul is shaky, you cannot drink because it's not obligatory for you to drink. Okay? But if you believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you drink, you do it and you drink. Because actually in this hadith, he said under one wing of the fly is disease, is sickness. When did human beings realize that flies carry disease? After the development of the microscope. In the 15th century. In the 15th century. Almost 1,000 years after Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made that statement. So, though people are quick to say, well, oh, we only know disease. Stop and think for a minute. He said there was disease there. How did he know? 1,000 years before the development of the microscope. So that should stop us and say, hey, you know, obviously he is giving us information. We may not know the details of it now. Maybe 50 years from now they will find the cure in the fly. But it is not something illogical. It is only something we don't know about. And this is the problem with science today, is that things that they don't know about, they claim don't exist. And as they say in Arabic, the lack of knowledge of a thing is not knowledge. If you don't have knowledge of something, that lack of knowledge is not itself knowledge. It's only a lack of knowledge. That's all you can say about it. Because I don't know of a cure from the fly doesn't mean there is no cure from the fly. All we can say is I don't know of a cure from the fly. That's all. But what people tend to say, modern science says, is there's no cure. 50 years from now, they say, oh, there is a cure. We were wrong before, now this is the real. And they do that all the time. Things have changed. They said it was this yesterday, today they say this, tomorrow they say something else. That's the nature. Because they don't have that humility before Allah to say, well, I think it might be this. No, it's this. We know. Common sense, if we go back to reason, tells us that if a snake didn't have, a poisonous snake, didn't have the antidote for his poison, what would happen when he bit his first victim, tried to eat him? He would die. Die from his own poison. Right? So he has to have the antidote within himself. So he has both the poison and the antidote. That's not something so illogical when you actually think it through. But unfortunately, this methodology, this approach, where reason should come first, whatever reason determines takes precedence over revelation. This was first expressed by a group known as the Mu'tazilites of the past, one of the first philosophical groups to break off mainstream Islam, the Mu'tazilites, where they claimed that none of the attributes of Allah mentioned in the Quran are His attributes. None of them. They didn't deny the statements in the Quran, but they said these are not His attributes. Because Allah is unknowable. Is unknowable. Greek philosophy taught a similar concept. And God in deep Greek philosophy is unidentifiable. Anything you can say He is what He isn't. So this is the route that they took. Because He's unknowable, any of these terms, they are terms which are from human expressions. They cannot be descriptions of God, of Allah. They went to that extreme. Later generations accepted some of that and rejected some. They said, okay, some of the attributes are the basic attributes and the others are to be interpreted in accordance with them. This is the 20 sifat that you talk about, that we hear spoken about. I guess as kids you're required to memorize, you know. That's what that's about. Identifying out of the many descriptions that Allah has given Himself, 20 which are considered to be basic ones. Why? Because reason tells us these have to be. Again, reason coming first. Reason tells us these 20 have to be. For Allah to be God, He has to have these 20. But all of the others, we will interpret as being one of the 20. The second category, that of the allegorical and literal, represents the way by which the Quran and the Sunnah is to be understood. Should we understand it according to the literal meaning, or should we understand it according to the allegorical meaning? So, when Allah said He is Al-Basir and As-Samir, the seeing and the hearing, as we know it, seeing requires eyes, hearing requires ears, and these are not applicable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, What do we do when we see things? Seeing helps us to know things. We know things by seeing them. We know things by hearing about them. So therefore, seeing and hearing goes back to knowing. So, according to the Khalaf, seeing and hearing, these attributes of Allah, are only expressions of His knowledge. So the knowledge, His attribute, Al-Alim, the all-knowing, this includes the seeing and the hearing. These were just expressions, allegorical expressions, to clarify knowing. So in other words, the text of the Quran, their obvious texts, are to be interpreted allegorically. This is what they say. Sounds reasonable. Sounds reasonable. But we would have to ask the question, knowing. How do we know? If you don't have a brain, can you know? Right? So then what? Then what? What do we do now? Because we just gave knowing to Allah, we cut out seeing and hearing because you need apparatus for it. What about knowing? You need apparatus for that too. So then you have to cut out knowing. Then if Allah is not knowing, meaning He doesn't know, you end up in a whole mess. You end up in a mess. So this is what happens with the logic and because where do you stop? And that's why the Mu'tazilites said, cancel all of them. The Ash'aris who came afterwards, they recognized that the Mu'tazilites had gone to an extreme. And they tried to find a middle path. Because they accepted hadith from the Sunnah and things like this. There was enough evidence out there that we should be believing in some of this. So they chose 20. But the reality is that the method used for choosing the 20 is faulty. It's faulty. Because the same reasons you use to exclude all those beyond the 20 are applicable to all those in the 20. So, the way of the Salaf was to take things literally, first and foremost. Take things literally. While applying the principle, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing similar to Him. So, if Allah says He sees, we don't say He doesn't see. We say He sees, but not as we see. Simple. As He said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing similar to Him. So whatever He has said, we accept. That's revelation. And revelation clarified that it is not the way that we do. Meaning it doesn't require eyeballs and all the other things that are connected to it. But we don't say what Allah said is not what He meant. Because, as we said in the very beginning, the Quran is Allah speaking to us as we speak to each other. And how do we speak to each other? In allegory? Do we speak in an allegorical way? Is that how we speak? So you have to be figuring out what we mean behind that and each and everything? No. We speak in literal terms. We understand what people are saying literally. We don't go to allegory unless the literal becomes impossible. Somebody said, I flew over KL. Okay. Flew over KL. Flapping his hands and feet and flew over KL. No. We understand he was in an airplane, right? The airplane flew over and I was in the airplane. I didn't fly. Because human beings don't fly. Okay? Not by themselves. So, when we speak in literal terms. And we only go to what is allegorical where the literal becomes untenable. It is not possible or not reasonable to be applied. So the early generation, when Allah said, وَهُوَ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْكُمْ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, is closer to you than your jugular vein. وَأَنَا أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْكُمْ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْكُمْ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ من, he referring to human beings, مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. I am closer to you than your jugular vein. Literally, what does that mean? Jugular vein is inside our heads. Carries blood to our brains. So that implies that he is inside you. That's what it implies. That's what the literal meaning implies. If he's closer than the jugular vein, it means he is inside each one of us. Allah. But we have so many other texts where Allah said he is above the heavens and the earth. He is above his creation. He is above the throne. We have so many other texts which indicate that. To say that this doesn't sound right. We have been forbidden to prostrate and to worship each other. Because if Allah is inside of you, then it means I should be able to just prostrate and worship you, worshiping Allah who is inside you. But this is not permissible. So the Sharia itself prevents that understanding. And the texts in the Quran and the Sunnah also reject that understanding. When Muawiyah ibn al-Hakam had brought his slave girl to the Prophet ﷺ, who he wanted to free, and the Prophet ﷺ asked her, "Where is Allah?" She replied, "Allah is above the heavens." And he asked her, "And who am I?" And she said, "You are the messenger of Allah." And he said to Muawiyah, "Free her because she is a true believer." So, that's clear. These texts contradict the concept of Allah being inside each and every one of us. So, we therefore have to look at the context in which the verse came. What did Allah say before that verse? What did He say after that verse? And you find that Allah is speaking about knowing what that person whispers, etc. So this is clarifying Allah's knowledge, or most intimate knowledge, of the human being. So we say that is what it is in fact referring to. But we have a reason for doing that. Because other texts, the majority of the texts, indicate other than the literal meaning. So that's when we shift to allegoricals. So not to say there are no allegories. Yes. Just as in our speech, we don't normally speak in allegories, but sometimes we use them. So, similarly, we approach the descriptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran using that same principle. The last principle that I would like to mention, the prerequisites of evidence. For those who claim that Allah is everywhere, who would use that same verse, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, using the same verse as proof, as support to their argument that Allah is everywhere. What do they do with that hadith that I just mentioned? The hadith is in Sahih Muslim. Authentic hadith. What do they do? They say this hadith was not mutawatir. It was not mutawatir. Mutawatir means that 10 or more Sahaba narrated it. 10 or more Tabi'een conveyed it. 10 or more Tabi'een conveyed it. Everywhere down the chain of narration, at least 10 people were conveying. There are very few hadiths like this. So they say, hadiths which are not mutawatir cannot be used as evidence in aqeedah. We can use it in fiqh, but not in aqeedah. Now this idea was invented by the Ash'aris in order to escape the implications of authentic hadith which contradicted their aqeedah built on reason and logic. That was the escape. They said that the hadith mutawatir, this gives us sure knowledge, whereas hadith which is not mutawatir gives us doubtful knowledge. There's an element of doubt there. We're not sure. So we cannot build our faith on evidence where there is an element of doubt in it. In fiqh we can go with elements of doubt, but in aqeedah we cannot. They made a distinction. A distinction which Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't make. That first generation, generations after them never made this distinction. This came up hundreds and hundreds of years later. This argument was. And as I said, it is mainly to escape the implications of the authentic hadiths which refute the aqeedah principles developed by the Khalaf. But the way of the Salaf was to accept the evidence as long as it was narrated authentically. So when Mu'adh ibn Jabal was sent to Yemen, one man, he taught the people aqeedah and fiqh. He taught them everything. There was no distinction. They didn't require him to bring others to support what he was saying about aqeedah. We'll accept from you the fiqh, but the aqeedah we won't accept. No. They accepted everything. When the Prophet ﷺ sent Mus'ab ibn Umair from Medina, from Mecca to Medina, to teach the people of Medina, the new convert Muslims, Islam, he taught them aqeedah, and fiqh was all together. No distinction was made between the two. So this was not the way of the first generation. And that's not what we hear in the statements of the leading scholars like Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i, who said, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبٌ. If the hadith is authentic, then it is my madhab. Madhab in aqeedah and fiqh. They didn't make a distinction and say, okay, we have a madhab in aqeedah, we have a madhab in fiqh, as developed later on. People will say, my madhab in aqeedah is Ash'ari, then I'm a Shafi'i in fiqh, and I'm a Naqshbandi in Sufi, Tasawwuf. Each area you had another title. This was not the way of the early generation. You're a Muslim. So, this line of argument is a modern line which has no basis in the understanding of the first generation. So if we are to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He revealed Himself in the Quran and in the Sunnah, we have to stick with what that first generation understood. They gave precedence to revelation over reason. When they heard the Prophet ﷺ say that the sun prostrates under the throne of Allah. They didn't ask him how it does. How does the sun prostrate under the throne of Allah? Today, people are asking that question. How could the sun prostrate under the throne of Allah? This hadith couldn't possibly be brought out. So they reject revelation based on their inability to comprehend. How? Well, Allah says in the Quran that, His creation glorifies Him. Make tasbih. But we just can't hear it and understand it. How? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it is recorded authentically from himself that stones and trees gave salams to him. How? How is a stone going to give salams? It doesn't have a mouth. You don't need to go into a house. Miracles happen. We believe in the miracle of Prophet Musa. When he threw down his staff, it turned into a snake. Not as Sufis have interpreted it in the Sufi tafsirs. They say that the staff of Musa represented, allegorical explanation, represented the dunya. So when Allah told him to throw it down, He was telling him to give up the dunya. And turning it into a snake was just showing him what is the reality of the dunya. Sounds nice. But that's not what the first generation understood. So we accept what Allah and how Allah has described Himself. Whatever comes to us in the Quran and the Sunnah, we accept it as literal first and foremost, only shifting to the allegorical where the literal cannot be understood. Not that we are incapable of understanding the hows, but just that what is said in the literal contradicts what we know of the rest of the deen in the literal sense. Because there is so much that we don't understand. The wine of paradise. Which doesn't intoxicate. And all of the other things described. We don't know. As the Prophet ﷺ said, no eye has ever seen it. No ear has ever heard it. It's not even crossed the mind of any of us, of what those things. Allah has used those things to help us better understand. And also that we use the methodology used by that first generation. Wherever authentic evidence comes to us, we accept it. We don't put conditions on it. It is our deed. That was the way of the early generation. So, I hope, inshallah, this gives some clarity for you. In your questions, we have some time for questions now. In your questions, if you have current issues that are related to this topic you'd like to get further clarity on, it's good for you to bring them up now, rather than going into the usual general topics about riba, hijab, inshallah. Anybody want to raise your hand, ask a question? Go ahead. Question, are the Ash'aris included among Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? According to them, they are Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Right? They represent Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They are the majority. According to many scholars who are not from the Ash'aris, maybe given different titles, Salafis, Wahhabis, Ahli Hadithis, and everything else, Hanbalis, whatever. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah represent, in fact, those who follow the Quran and Sunnah as understood by the Sahaba. In which case, with regards to this issue of aqeedah, they would not be considered within the fold of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The true Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But what we should keep in mind, that though somebody on an issue or a number of issues may not be holding the opinion of what we would say the true Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it doesn't mean that you have to write the person off totally. Because we have well-known scholars of the past who had some of these views of the Ash'aris. But we don't say they're not from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. People like Imam al-Nawawi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and others held some of these views. So, though in a general sense we'll say this represents a deviation, it doesn't mean that everybody who held some of these opinions is automatically considered deviated. But it is those who held this opinion in a fanatical way where it covered all of their understanding, not just on some issues here and there. but that was their full understanding. Yes, they had deviated from what we would call mainstream Islam. The name used for it is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And in our times, the best approach is to try to discuss these things out. If we are to try to reach those who hold these other opinions, and we come to them saying, as they do, we are Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and you all are the deviants, then we'll not get very far. We'll not get very far. So rather than take what I call the sledgehammer approach, you know, you have this big hammer and you're just going to bang them on the head, everyone. You know, Salafi, boom. It's not going to turn anybody into a Salafi. It's only going to create animosity. So it is better to reason gently. Prophet ﷺ had spoken about ar-rifq, saying that gentleness, whenever it enters into anything, it beautifies it. Whenever it's taken from anything, it defaces it. So what you will achieve through gentleness, you will not achieve through harshness. Our brothers and sisters in faith, if Prophet Musa was told to go to Pharaoh and speak to him gently, Pharaoh was saying, Ana Rabbukumul A'la, I am your Lord on high. Hey, can't we speak gently to our brothers and sisters who may hold some of these views? Of course. They have more rights. We're not better than Musa, and they're not worse than Pharaoh. So the least we can do is to be gentle in our approach, to be able to discuss with them, to reflect and to reason, and they can come to the understanding as we have. Inshallah. How do we determine what hadith is authentic? What one scholar says is sahih, another scholar says is just hasan, and maybe even another one says it's da'if. How do we deal with this with respect to matters of aqeedah? The point is that what determines a sahih hadith, an authentic hadith, are known. I mean, this is a science, the science of hadith. If there are differences of opinion about the authenticity of a hadith, some differences may be considerable because there are reasons, etc. behind it, and some may not be. As we said, some people declare hadith to not be authentic simply because it goes against their logic. So it's not every difference that we will keep and consider. So for you, if you're not able to determine or to resolve a situation where one scholar says a hadith is sahih, another one says it's da'if, we don't use hasan, because sahih and hasan are both authentic. Sahih and da'if. If we're not able to resolve it, then as Allah said, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those who know. If you don't know, that is what is required. What does the Mu'tazilite mean when they imply that the Quran was created? what is the origin of the Mu'tazilite group? Do the Mu'tazilites still exist now? And if so, what group? Shiites? Okay, this is a class. A class in aqeedah about the Mu'tazilites. The Mu'tazilites we could say were born, or the beginning of their thought was born with the Khawarij, those who first broke off from mainstream Islam, who were known to hold the opinion that one who commits a sin will be in hell forever, because this became later one of the main beliefs of the Mu'tazilites. So we can see the birth of the idea was there. It may not have been the philosophers who then developed it came after, but the birth of that idea came with the Khawarij. But that is their belief today. One who commits major sin, one who enters hell, will never come out. The Shiites have that in their belief system. Also the Ibadis of Yemen, of Oman, also have that similar belief today. The problem here is disseminating through the knowledge. There is a gap between knowing and not knowing that has been or has an impact on the society, especially the young, and even the elders. Yes, the challenge is to disseminate the knowledge. We need to utilize all of the various means in our hands to spread this knowledge as far and as wide as we can. Perhaps because most of us have busy lives and we only come together on weekends and occasions, the knowledge tends not to go much beyond ourselves. You know, we come to Yais and Ta'aleem, we hear a nice talk, we talk about how nice it was, and then we forget it. It doesn't go much further than ourselves. So we're not really applying the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. We're not. Convey whatever we have learned from the Messenger, even if it's a single verse of the Quran. This is our responsibility, that we carry this message forward. We all have neighbors, friends, classmates. We all have them. And for sure they have these beliefs that we're talking about. Who is going to take it to them? The da'i of the center? He's the one now responsible to go see all of your friends. How is he going to do that? It is like Muhammad ﷺ carrying the message of Islam to us. He was rahmatan lil alameen. He's a mercy for all the world. But did he carry the message to us individually? No. There are people here, in our place, in our time, who carry the message to us. So similarly, when we impart certain knowledge, certain information here, it becomes your duty to share it, to take it beyond the doors of the ISM Ta'aleem. The 20 sifat are taught at the schools in Malaysia, and our children took exams on these. How do we counter this situation? Because the alternative schools teaching ilm or sciences according to the Salaf is very limited. We need to set up more schools. How else? We have to set up more schools. If there are not enough schools conveying the correct understanding, then we have to develop them. We have to develop materials which convey it, subtly or whatever, but that is our responsibility. Or we have to try to get into positions of authority where we can make decisions which can make those changes. You know, whether it is through electoral politics or whatever, you know. We try to reach those sensitive areas. We try to be leaders in the fields of education. You know. If we look at all of the graduates from the colleges of education here, PhDs in education, educational administration, etc. How many of them have the understanding of the Salaf? If we can look and see, we cannot even count on one hand how many. I mean, there are no figures. There's zero. Then it means the failure is where? With us. Because if we feel it is a responsibility to carry this message, then we have to choose and focus on the key areas where we are able to influence this educational process. We cannot do it otherwise. Setting up alternative schools is only a temporary stopgap. It's only temporary. And it's only going to benefit a small number. So therefore, we have to do that. I'm not saying don't do it. Set up more schools. But even more importantly, we need to have people in the sensitive positions who can, in fact, influence, open the door to this other understanding, the correct understanding of aqeedah, inshallah. This sounds like somebody asking me to repeat the lecture again in more detail. Please elaborate on principle number 2. Allegorical, literal. Revelation takes precedence over reason. In general, laymen like us follow Muslim scholars like you, but do not want to be, I guess, blind followers, not understanding Islam. Thank you. Well, what can I say? If the term allegorical isn't clear to you, allegorical means non-literal, right? If I say to you, give me your hand, or give me a hand, I have something to do. I say, can you give me a hand? Now, literally would mean chopping off somebody's hand and passing it to me. Okay, here is a hand. That's the literal meaning. So we do use this terminology often. Give me a hand. But that's not the majority of our conversation. When we speak, we don't use "give me a hand" all the time. In every statement, every instruction the majority of the time, we speak literally. When the boss tells the secretary, "Write this letter," she doesn't stop to think, does he literally mean write the letter? Or does he mean tell somebody? Or does he mean get the letter? Or does he mean she's trying to figure out, what does he really mean? He said, write the letter. That's what it means. Write the letter. That's how we speak. So, the way of the first generation was to take whatever Allah said as He said it. And not go to try to explain it away allegorically, unless the literal meaning didn't make sense, like "give me a hand." The literal meaning, "give me a hand," doesn't make sense. So we take it to mean help me. Can you please define aqeedah in layman terms, in the simplest form and understanding? Aqeedah means belief. Belief, what you believe. But when we speak about aqeedah, we're talking about really belief in Allah. That's the primary area of our aqeedah, our principle of faith. It has to do with belief in Allah. And then belief in whatever Allah has conveyed to us. It also includes belief in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and belief in whatever he has conveyed to us. So all of that together represents our aqeedah. How do I convince the anti-sunnah? Their reasons are, it is contradicting. It was written long ago by humans, despite sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling them not to write. Well, there is a major work done by Dr. Azami, Mustafa Azami, who was one of my teachers when I studied in Riyadh, my master's. He did a work which was his PhD thesis on studies in early hadith literature, in which he has outlined with all of the evidence the argument for the authenticity of hadith literature, which rejects the argument that it was written long after the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He deals with the issue of the Prophet ﷺ instructing the Sahaba in the beginning of Islam not to write down anything besides the Quran, in order to avoid confusion of his sayings, writing down his sayings, with the writing of the Quran, to avoid confusion. But there are many other hadiths in which he instructed Sahaba to write. So we have to look at both sides. And he has brought all the evidences clarifying those points. As to contradicting, as the Quran does not contradict itself, the Sunnah doesn't contradict itself either. Authentic Sunnah. We may find contradictions between inauthentic traditions and the Sunnah, but where we find apparent contradictions, what in fact you are talking about are generalities and specific circumstances. Where, for example, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had said one should not pray after sunrise, after Fajr until sunrise, after Asr until sunset. But then we have hadiths where Prophet ﷺ prayed after Asr. After Asr. So here is an apparent contradiction. Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked him, how are you praying after Asr when you told us not to? So he clarified, saying, what I'm praying are not just prayers that I just felt like praying, which are not allowed after Asr, but prayers which are from my regular prayers, Sunnah prayers, of Dhuhr, which I was unable to do due to some people who had come to see me, a delegation had come to see me, and I was unable to do it. So what he has clarified here is that if there is a reason, if there is another instruction about doing these prayers, then that is fine to do them after Asr. But if there's no instruction and we're just going to come from ourselves, we just felt like praying, then no. After Asr, after Fajr, don't pray until the sun has risen or the sun has set. It's not a contradiction. But one was a general rule and the other one was a specific clarification. In the, I guess, context of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, where do the Shia stand? Well, they're not a part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. I mean, they have deviated from the mainstream in a major way. Many scholars hold that they have left Islam altogether. Some say it is the common masses we won't say that about, but there are knowledgeable ones who would say that. They know better and they're teaching otherwise. Is Islam black and white? No, it's blue and yellow, green. We have all kinds of colors. Are we restricted only to black and white? If you are right, I'm wrong. Salaf is right, Khalaf is wrong. I can have wudu and not have wudu. Or does one have wudu or not have wudu? There are some times when it is black and white. It's either right or wrong. There are some times when both can be right because there are both possibilities that could be taken from the same text. So we're not saying everything that everyone who fell into the Salaf did was right, nor that everything that people who are classified as the Khalaf did was wrong. No. To say that is extreme. No. Aren't the differences in interpretation rahmah for the ummah? Now there's a narration which claims that اختلاف أمتي رحمة. I had heard that long time ago when I first came to Islam. اختلاف أمتي رحمة. Well, that hadith is fabricated. Not understood. Not correct. In fact, all the descriptions of differences in the Quran is that it is a musibah. The differences were signs of the curse of Allah. Yes. Example where Allah tells us وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on firmly to Allah's rope, Quran and Sunnah, together, and don't split up. What about the hadith of the 73 sects? Only one going to heaven, the rest going to hell. Is it authentic? Yes. I've heard that Dr. Yusuf Qardawi said the sanad of the hadith is not sahih. He was not saying, denying the meaning of the hadith. No, the hadith is authentic hadith. I mean, there are many different narrations of it. But we should understand that that group which is going to paradise, the Firqa Najiyah, they call it, the saved sect, is not a hairline, like everybody's walking, on this hairline. If your toe gets off, you're off. No, it's not. It's abroad. It accepts differences. It doesn't mean that everybody has to agree on everything. The Sahaba didn't agree on everything. The Tabi'een didn't agree on everything. But the basic faith is one. The basic elements of the faith is agreed upon. Fine details, differences will happen. Because fiqh, understanding, will differ. How do we answer to those who do not believe in the existence of God? When they question if God exists, why does He leave the ill to remain ill until they meet death? There are huge numbers of explanations with regards to this. Illness, pain, etc., for the believer is purification. So for a given person, if he or she is patient with their illness, it purifies them of their sins. So there is benefit in it. Illness for others may be punishment because of the kind of life they lived, etc. The illness is a way by which Allah afflicts them and punishes them, like AIDS. AIDS, for the majority of people who suffer from it, it is a punishment because of their homosexual lifestyle. This is a punishment that Allah has brought on them. For those heterosexuals who end up with it as a result of promiscuity, it's also a punishment. For those who get it by blood transfusion, it's a test. For those who get it as a result of, what was the other source? Blood transfusions. Anyway, point is that it varies from person to person. Whether it is a test, whether it is a punishment, whether it is a reminder, in the end, how we respond to that will determine whether it was good for us or not. So for the homosexual who catches AIDS, realizes that this is a punishment from Allah, turns back to Allah, repents, and gives up that lifestyle, then it was good for him. It will take him to paradise. For the heterosexual who gets it by blood transfusion and he curses God, couldn't be a God here. Why should this happen to me? That takes him to hell. Even though he wasn't a homosexual doing the other things of the homosexual. So for one, the same disease, one it takes him to paradise, the other one it takes him to hell. It depends on how we respond to these tests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What if we join some ibadah? For example, reciting Yasin, Tahleel for the dead on Friday night, knowing that it is bid'ah, but we just sit there to do dhikr. Well, if you're not joining in the actual practice, then the sin is not really on you, although your presence may be support of it. If you're in a position of authority where people look up to you, so your presence now becomes misguidance to others, then of course it's not a good thing. You shouldn't be there. If you're a common person who is pressurized by your whole family and you don't really have any way out of it, and you're just there and you just remember Allah, you're not really taking part in it, then your situation is different from the other person's situation. Inshallah, Allah doesn't hold you accountable. But this thing, of course, has its limitations. If we go to a Christmas party and remember Allah, there are limits. Sufis say that they practice tasawwuf, and that tasawwuf is a part of the Quran and the Sunnah. They say, should we all ask, or should we all view Sufism, they say, should we all view Sufism, or is it haram? Should we all, I don't know, I guess be in Sufism? I'm not clear really. That is not clear. But our point is that some things in Sufism that is common amongst Sufi teachings are from Islam. Something. Like living a simple life, not accumulating too many things of the world, remembering Allah often. You know, these are from Islam. We don't need to give it another name. This is Islam. But then other things which in fact represent the real body of beliefs that we now know as Sufism, like the belief that the human being can become one with Allah. You know, this is not from Islam. Not acceptable. Misguidance. or the belief that some people, due to their closeness to Allah, have a certain status which put them in special categories. They have a hierarchy of saints. And when you're in that hierarchy of saints, people can pray to you, ask for your help. And they promote this. That is serious. This is major shirk. Major shirk. If we call on others besides Allah to help us, this is major shirk. So no difference between the Sufi who calls on Abdul Qadir and the Shiite who calls on Zainul Abidin or Hassan or Hussein. No difference between them in terms of shirk. And this has become the main features of Sufism today. This is the point. There was a time in the past, distant past, when Sufism, in the early stages, there were people who were what they call aesthetics, who would, live simple lives, stay away from big gatherings of people and enjoyment, and that they felt they wanted to be closer to Allah. Later on, when a philosophy came behind it, this concept of human being, the human soul, being a part of Allah in each and every human being. This was another view of the religion. And then they created this concept of the outer and the inner, that everything has an outer and an inner. There's an outer text, then there's an inner meaning, a hidden meaning, known only to a special group. That group that links itself to Abu Bakr, who was with Muhammad ﷺ when he was in the cave. When they were in the cave, Muhammad ﷺ told Abu Bakr certain special things. And Abu Bakr told so-and-so, and so-and-so told so-and-so, so-and-so told so-and-so told Khidr. And Khidr told my sheikh. You will see the golden chain of the Naqshbandis, right? You will see Khidr right in there. Of course, well known. This is alive. The belief that Khidr is alive and present, this is false. But the most dangerous thing is not just these philosophies, but the intermediacy that comes from it, where people are proposing the idea that we can call on others besides Allah. And Sheikh Nazim al-Qubrusi, who is very popular here in Malaysia among certain classes, the ruler of Brunei is one of his followers. He teaches that when the time of death comes, the angel of death does not take the soul of his followers. He will be there at the time of your death to take your soul and hand it over to the angels of the next life. He teaches this, and they believe it. And he tells them that when Munkar and Nakir sit you up in the grave and ask you, who is your Lord, what was your religion, who is your messenger, I will be there, whispering in your ear, Muhammad, Islam, Allah, Islam, Muhammad. Allah. So he's guaranteeing them tickets to paradise. Because if you have those answers finished, you're going to paradise. That's what he's telling them. If you're one of my murids, that's what the followers call a murid, one who has no will of his own, then you're guaranteed paradise. And his followers believe that he can be in 7 different locations at the same time, around the world. In Hajj, he's on Hajj. His followers say he's with us on Hajj. And he'll be in Sri Lanka, he'll be in, Cyprus. 7 different locations. And his sheikh was able to be in 14 different locations at the same time. Muhammad ﷺ was only in one location. What are we saying here? How do we advise somebody who says, Allah loves making me suffer and living a miserable life? Well, what do we say to somebody who says that? May your suffering be a means of purification. And may your miserable life remind you of the life to come. That's the end of our questions. Inshallah.